はい、それでは皆様お戻りのようですので。
Now we would like to begin the panel discussion since everyone is back. The theme of panel discussion is Roles and Future of Community Car Sharing. The moderator is Dr. Takahiro Suzuki from the Tohoku University New Industry Creation Hatchery Center, and Takeru Shibayama from Vienna University of Technology, and also Mr. Angelo Meuleman from Taxistop, and also Jeffery Matthijs of Autodelen.net, and also from the Nagasaki University of Technology, Dr. Kiichiro Hatoyama, and from the Japan Carsharing Association, we have Yoshida Takehiko. These are the panelists. Ms. Vilma Ostreicher was supposed to be attending this panel discussion, but due to the circumstances, she is not participating in this panel discussion. But she will be delivering a short speech towards the end of this panel, this symposium. Now, let us begin the panel discussion. Please relax, everyone. We cannot really circulate the microphone amongst the audience. However, I hope you will participate this discussion in your own way. Our time is very much limited. However, we have received, actually, indeed, quite a lot of questions. Thank you so much for your interest. Wish we could cover all the questions, but due to the time constraints, unfortunately, we will only be able to some of the questions, so please forgive us. We have prepared actually some questions just in case that we do not receive any questions from the participants, but it seems we've already have received enough questions from the audience. Therefore, we would like to dedicate our panel discussion to cover as many questions from you as possible. We would like to start from the light questions, and we shall be very gentle to the interpreters. I hope interpreters can keep up with the discussion. First question goes to Jeffery, Mr. Jeffery Matthijs. Are there any cases where car is used for a trip over 2 to 3 days, even if you are not going to the moon? In your last presentation slide, you referred to the trip to the moon. So this question is about using the car sharing service for 2 to 3 day trips. Are there any cases of such usage? Jeffery, could you answer to that question?
Yes, I can. Actually, car sharing has been used for longer trips and for shorter trips. Car sharing is very flexible. If you are using car sharing for more than 1 day, there are a few options you have. As we described, there are different types of car sharing. And most of the time, for short trips, people are using car-sharing providers with an own fleet, such as Cambio in Belgium. If they go to a longer destination or longer days, then it's often very wise to use a peer-to-peer platform, because with a peer-to-peer platform, you know exactly before you make your trip how many you're going to pay. And most of the times, I say most of the times, not always, it's cheaper than using a car-sharing provider with an own fleet. So we as CarShare Belgium, we are saying to the people, try to combine different types of car sharing. And for each type of car sharing, there's a good reason to use. So longer trips, most of the time peer-to-peer car sharing. If you do shorter trips or a one-day trip, you can use car sharing providers with an own fleet. Is that all right?
Thank you very much for the answer. So that was a very thorough answer. So we shall be very good at managing the time so that we could cover as many questions as possible. Now, let's go to the second question. Second question goes to actually everyone. So I would like each panelist to answer in a very succinct, in a brief manner. I would like to replace my car. But my car is too big, and sometimes it does not fit into certain types of the parking space. So can you target the people who already owns his or her own car? So based on the usage, sometimes you can use your own car, but sometimes you might like to use the car sharing service. So depending on how you would like to use the car, perhaps you can combine the usage of your own car, or you utilize the car sharing cars. So how do you think about this, Dr. Shibayama? Actually, I'm a member of the 2 car sharing groups, and then that car sharing group, one of them actually have 5 different models of cars, small to big. So car sharing group can offer a variety of sizes. So I think that's a very good benefit. Okay, Angelo?
I won't give an answer as an expert, but just as a private person, I'm also a user of a car sharing system. I have a own private car, but sometimes I need a bigger car or whatever, and that's just why car sharing is so interesting, the appropriate car for every journey.
Keeping time in mind, I completely agree with the 2 former speakers. So.
Maybe I should say the same. I agree with the previous speakers. As mentioned in the presentation, it's not about you preventing you from owning a car. So you can own a car, and then you could seek car sharing service for additional usage of the car. So I think it's a good way of using it. In our case, some users actually own their own cars, but they still participate in various outings organized by the community car sharing. And sometimes you need a larger car for a longer trip. And so that requires the community participation. And we actually rent a larger car for free. So that's one way of using the community car sharing. Well, Mr. Yoshizawa answered that last, because in Ishinomaki car sharing service, they have a variety of the models. So some of them are so big that you can use it for moving your address. You can actually use it for moving. So I think it's a very good question, touches upon a variety of the sizes available under the car sharing service. Now, let's go to the next question. Now, the question is becoming more and more challenging. There are similar questions, slightly different, but are there any conflicts with taxi industry, taxi service? So, for example, Angelo, less mobile service that you mentioned, is there any conflict with the taxi industry? What was their reaction? With regard to the less mobile service, there was another question. So how frequently drivers takes responsibility of the driving? And then perhaps this kind of service is not only for mobility, but it could also contribute to the welfare of the people by watching over people. And Mr. Yoshizawa, what are the reasons, or what was the background of starting this car sharing service in Ishinomaki, which is heavily affected by the disaster? And then was there any complaints from the taxi industry? I think it was mentioned by one of the speakers that the taxi industry is sometimes not very happy with this kind of car sharing service. So I think that is the background of all these questions. So Angelo, can you perhaps start?
With the taxi sector, I was prepared for that question. We started with our service for elderly people already in the mid-80s. That was long before Uber. That made it easier. Today it's more difficult. But at that moment, also the taxi sector in Belgium was not so happy with our service, but we found an agreement with the taxi sector. And that's why I have shown that in my presentation. There are some conditions to enter the system. The minimum revenue per person, or the maximum revenue, so it's not for everyone, but every municipality can create own rules. And in a big city with a bigger market for taxi sector, the rules are more strict. In remote areas, sometimes there is no market for taxi. Then you don't have to create limits. And in general, and I think that's very important, every transport operator, taxi or public transport or car sharing or carpooling, should be more modest. We can fulfill certain needs, but there are many needs we cannot fulfill. But together we are really complementary, and together we can become an alternative for car ownership and have more sustainable transport in general. So, and that's for the same message for public transport for ourselves as for the taxi sector.
まあ今のところは面と向かってこうなんかねタクシー会社さんとかタクシー協会さんから
For now, we don't receive any direct complaints from taxi companies or the taxi associations. For one thing, the users of the car sharing actually uses the taxis as well, and so when they use taxi, they just want somewhere spontaneously, and but the community share is less spontaneous, and they need to make a booking well in advance, and so taxi service provides with the different nature of service in comparison to the community share, car share, and so those who have been using the taxis will keep using taxis, and then to supplement the taxi service, they also use the community service or community car, but then the restaurant business, for instance, give us that 40% of them, their customers are increasing by 40%. That means that they will use car share to go to the restaurants, and then use a taxi to go back home for better spontaneity. And so far I haven't felt or witnessed any direct conflict. I wouldn't say, I didn't quite say this is the case of bottleneck, but I do hear some rumors about conflict, not only with the taxi companies, but also with other public transport type of companies, and so these traditional companies tend to have antagonistic view on the new forms of transport, such as car sharing. But then there's the open venue for the public discussion and the public hearing on the services like this, and that has been gaining or increasing the understanding among these professionals, the transport professionals, and also the car sharing representatives would go to visit to make friends with these professional transport services. And as far as I know, I think these companies have better understanding of what car sharing is. But what they're struggling to understand is that increase of such common or the shared transport may be may only pose as a threat to them, and they don't think in a more constructive manner that more mobility that people want, the more demand there may be for their professional transport services as well. So we can give them some concrete examples of such a case that car sharing is actually bringing more demand for the professional transport services. And so the part of the question is that why the sharing of a vehicle is not spreading as fast as it should. And so a major difference between the car sharing and the taxi service, for instance, is that the timing for booking. And for the car sharing tends to require booking in advance. Taxis don't. And so the users tend to be using them according to their needs. And they're very smart in doing so. And so in that case, taxis can focus their marketing on the more spontaneous and versatile transport. And so it would be meaningless really to have a confronting feeling, because in fact they do not compete with the community car sharing. So we'll be quick. So in the case of Kamaishi City, I've been engaged in the community car sharing where the population was declining quite severely. The residents do want the mobility, but then they have a sense of guilt causing that they might cause some inconvenience or to people who would be driving them voluntarily. And so this sense of guilt, sense of withholding their desire for mobility can be addressed before the such community car sharing can thrive in that particular community. And it seems that so the moderator will control the time. So if you would like to say something, please do interact. Okay, so the next question is about Yoshida-san as well. So there was a mention of the conflict with the taxi business. Now, what about the legal issue? For instance, this one community charges 500 yen per 5 kilometers rather, and is it applicable to all the places in Japan? So there's the different specific legal questions, such as the license plate, and I believe that Yoshida-san must have struggled from the legal perspective. So City of Ishinomaki and Asensho University are now hosting the regular opinion exchange meeting with the local community, and since about 3 or 4 years ago, and so then they visited 3 or 4 years ago the local transport bureau to learn better about the legal and the regulatory framework. So if the driver receives the fee, then without professional license, then it'll be illegal. But as long as the driver is not making profit, it will not be illegal. So basically, the charge is for the equal sharing between the users for the cost that is incurred from the service. And that will not be illegal because nobody's making profit. And But then, so rather than having to pay or bear the large sum of cost in one go, the idea is to share the cost in advance among the members bit by bit by paying 500 yen per 5 kilometers, so that there will be accrual of a big fund. And so the very nature of this the car sharing system is the mutual support system. And so for that matter, the Transport Bureau, the government wing, has given the approval for this particular case. And also this translates to the different the license plate. So this is not a professional transport service, so it doesn't require professional license plate. But for the cars used for the car rental, to supplement the revenue, we switch the license plate so that it is indicated to the professional. So what about outside of Japan? In the case of Austria, in particular the charge, Australia takes a completely different method in charging. And there's the national standard, and so 1 kilometer of transport, 52 cents will be charged, and this is spent on many things. And for instance, you can use your own car for business transport, and using the Google Map, they can calculate automatically the distance and multiply it with 42 cents. And so as long as the cost or the charge is less than 42 cents per kilometer, that is considered as non-profitable. And if the charge exceeds 42 cents per kilometer, that is considered profit-seeking operation. So the different laws and regulations apply. And so that's a completely different nationwide system.
The difference is making profit or not. And in Belgium, there's an official kilometer price. It's like 40 yen. So and if you are asking more money or receiving more money, then you become a taxi. And because we have volunteers, so they are just refunded for the cost they're making with their own car, but they are not making profit. That's the difference with Uber. An Uber driver is doing this job to have some extra revenue. He is making profit, so that's taxi. And we are offering the same service, but with the other motivation, the social motivation.
ありがとうございます。今の
Thank you very much. I think that a lot of the issues have been clarified with this discussion. So let us go on to the next topic. We received many questions related to this particular question. The first question is to Angelo. What is the relationship between promoting the use of public transport modes by using car sharing? Why does car sharing contribute to the expansion of the use of other public transport modes? And how does it impact the mobility of the residents? This is a question to Jeffrey, which is that in Belgium, do most people use their own cars? Do they not use taxis and buses in their daily life? To Angela again, what is the reason for this modal shift? Is it reducing the dependency on cars? Another question to Jeffrey and Angelo. How much public transport is being used by the users of car shares? When you think of the overall mission or vision for public transport modes, Can you assume that there's going to be a synergy between the different public transport modes and car sharing mechanisms? So first to Angelo. What's the relationship between promoting other public transport mode utilization and car sharing? Does car sharing actually expand the use of other public transport modes, and why?
It's a difficult question. I don't really understand the difference between two questions about modal shift, but I will try to give an answer. The answer is a little bit psychology. When you have a car, it becomes a reflex to use the car. You don't think before you go somewhere. The moment you get rid of your car, then you think before you go somewhere. And because of car sharing, you have an option to get rid of your car, then you become a member of a car sharing system, and then you think to go for shopping, maybe I need a car or maybe I can walk, depending on what you will buy. If you go to IKEA, you need a car. If you go to a grocery store nearby, you can walk, you can use your bicycle. And we see that our Cambio users, the first year, they are using quite often shared cars. But then they become aware of the price also, but they also get used to public transport, to cycling, and that creates the modal shift. Mobility becomes a rational process instead of a reflex. That's the difference. And that's why our shareholders, the public transport operators, they are just organizing campaigns for car sharing. That's really unique. That doesn't happen. It's not happening in many countries. A bus company who's promoting car sharing. They're not doing this because they like us. They know if we promote car sharing, people will buy new season tickets, will create new revenue for the public transport operator. That's how it works.
Angelo, 結構混ざった質問をうまく説明してくれてありがとうございます。
Thank you so much for that summarization of all these different questions and answers. So I actually implemented a survey in Austria, and apart from the psychological effect, by using car sharings, they become more aware of the costs that are involved in owning a car, because a fixed cost of owning a car is so high. So even you're only aware of the gasoline costs on a daily basis, but in fact, you start understanding the total cost of owning a car when you enter a car share system. And so in Austria, this is one of the responses that we received often, that people become much more aware of the cost of owning a car. As the question implied, by using car share services, you could see that there is an expansion of public transport services. But I think on the background of this is that the very big first step is to make the choice of selling your car and not owning a car. But that's something that's very difficult to understand as a concept. So what is the motivation of a car owner to quit owning a car? And perhaps moving on to car sharing schemes. Angelo or Jeffrey, either one of you can answer this question.
We would respond the same. Well, I think there are several reasons to start car sharing. One of the most important reasons is financial. It's just cheaper to not own a car. It's cheaper to do a car sharing scheme. That's one. In Belgium, you can save up to 3,000 euros per year with not owning a car and making use of car sharing. So that's one. The second one is owning a car is tough. You have to pay insurance, you have to go to the garage, you have to park the car. If you do car sharing, all those things are away. So it's just easy to do car sharing. So those things are two very important arguments. And a third argument, not in every car scheme, but for instance in the Japan Car Sharing Association, is of course you get in contact with your neighbors, and that's also very important. So I think there are several reasons to start car sharing and not owning a car. For me, it's very obvious, and I think we need to promote car sharing to people and let them understand that it's much more easier and convenient to not own a car.
もう一つ追加すると、引っ越しの時ってすごいいいタイミングなんですね。
You know, it's a real good timing when you are moving to another place to leave your car and go to a car sharing scheme. You know, because your mobility and the destination of your travel changes when you move, you can actually encourage people to start using public transport means. For example, in Vienna, depending on the district when you move, you receive pamphlets regarding this particular region that you've moved into, for example, car sharing schemes or public transport. Or for some cities that give you a free voucher to use transport for one whole year if you move to that area. So this is a very good triggering point to review your transport mode when you move to another city. So I think a triggering event such as moving to another city is a good, provides a good impetus. Professor Hatoyama, do you have any comments? As I was listening to the panelists, it came to mind that car sharing is one of the many choices that are available in Belgium or other countries. You know, if you rely too much on the car, you automatically use the car. But if you have a car sharing scheme, then car sharing becomes just one of the very many transport or mobility systems. But car sharing schemes have to be convenient for it to be in, and also other public transport means have to also be convenient from the user's perspective, or they are not choices at all. That is exactly the point that I wanted to make. Mr. Yoshizawa, you actually have some questions regarding this point. Car sharing schemes are still only used by limited numbers of users. Aren't there some obstacles or challenges to expanding this scheme? When you think of the public transport modes that are available today, how can they be better combined with the car sharing schemes that you have today? Could you make some comments with respect to the synergies between other public transport modes and car sharing? Mainly, we have a linkage with the bus routes in our car sharing scheme. Those people can use buses will use the buses. As was referred to by Professor Shibata, the car share schemes are used when to areas which are not serviced by the buses. Well, if you can walk or bicycle to the areas, then people will walk or will bicycle. But the point is that car share schemes are used in spots that are blank, that are not serviced by bus routes or by railway routes or other modes. So when we take a survey of the car share users, as to whether they use buses, about 30% of our users use buses as well. There is not one person who started using car share services and have totally quit using buses or other transport modes. So they use car shares services to areas where they have no buses, or they would go one way by the car share service, and they will return by bus. So there is a segmentation of the market between the two modes. But if you go to the deep populated areas, I went to Ayukawa in the Oshika Peninsula. There was one person who started car sharing. But in the case of Oshika Peninsula, from Ayukawa City to the Niseki Hospital, it takes about 1 hour. And so if you have to go and come back, it's a total of 2 hours. And so we couldn't continue this car sharing scheme in the Oshika Peninsula. And so that is very important to use hubs. I think it's important that we support the residents so that there's a kind of a transport hub where different transportation modes can be linked. As Mr. Yoshida stated, among the users, first, car sharing does not compete with buses because they complement each other. But in terms of cooperation, I think there's still a lot of opportunity there. As to whether, and now I would like to take the microphone to Mayor Kameyama to give us a comment. As for the future car sharing vision, our mayor is always very supportive of this car sharing scheme, but we would like to expand the car sharing services to the peninsulas and other remote areas around around this region. Could we have some comments from the mayor? What we have high hopes is to expand the service to the peninsula because the Great East Japan earthquake have really devastated the area, and all of the houses have actually been rebuilt in the higher grounds of the peninsula. But in these higher grounds, there are no it's very difficult for the buses to reach these high areas. So the residents who live on the top of the hills, they have been evacuated from the coastal area to the top of the hills, and it's a huge challenge to provide public transport services to these new housing developments. So we're talking about the principle that car sharing mechanisms have to be inclusive. That kind of challenge or initiative has to be implemented here in this region as well, I believe.
As for the competition with the public transportation services, rather than competition, I believe there could be a very coexistence in a complementary manner. Maybe, Dr. Shibayama, you can add to that. Well, it's not that I can offer advice, but I would like to introduce you one example. At the very north part of the Italiana, there is a community with a town of about 100,000 people, and there is a Milano with the 40,000 people, and the railroad was connecting the two places. However, this service stopped, and when the service was stopped, there were only 300 users per day, so it was not sustainable because per annum it was only about 200,000 people. In 1991, the rail services connecting two places stopped. In 2005, the service resumed. And after the resumption of the service, can you imagine how many passengers they gained? Dr. Hatayama? 1,000 per day? No, much more than that. 5,000 users per day, or it could be as large as 7,000 users. They only improved the quality of the railway service. And also each station has become a hub in its own way. And the bus services were all coordinated. So there was a good connection with all the stations and bus services. And as a result of that, the local residents started using the railway service. So there was only 100,000 people per annum as a users, but now it has multiplied. So if you provide a good quality service, even geographically the condition is the same, you could actually increase the number of the users multifold. It was such an unbelievable example, but I think this is something we can learn from. So looking back in the Angelo's presentation, I think there was an example of MobiHub. You need to work together with other transportation providers. So there would be a physical link, and also there could be a digital platform to link the various transport service providers as a platform. And also administration needs to play as a coordinator. So I think those are the 3 factors. I think that are very sort of concrete and quite essential. Angelo looks like he wants to say something, but we really need to manage the time quite strictly. So I think there's one important point that has emerged from our discussion. Now, I would like to slightly change the topic. We received one question in English. And there were actually quite a few questions in English, but I would like to just pick one.
Most drivers are old. In Japan, many accidents. つまり、多くのドライバーの方。
So let me translate into Japanese. If drivers are rather old, are not concerned about the safety? Because in Japan, we've seen many accidents caused by senior drivers. I think this question probably goes to either Jeffrey or Angelo, because in Japan, this is already a well-known issue. And the other question is for Angelo. We understood that Cambio brought about positive changes. Has there been any survey on the positive impact on health related to Cambio? With regard to health, I mean, Cambio is not the only factor. If you go out very often, maybe you can improve your health condition. So Cambio is not everything. So it may not be straightforward. However, if you could comment on positive impact on health by Cambio, maybe you can start. Angelo, you can start from Angelo, and you can answer to those 2 questions.
Question about the aging population and safety. I think it's a problem if drivers become older, and that's the reason why you need to give them solutions, alternatives. Is their right to go somewhere. Mobility is a right, and if you don't give them the solutions, they will still use the car themselves. So that's why the Japan Car Sharing Association is doing so useful work, and I hope it will go to other municipalities also. That's really clear. Then, is there research about a positive change on health because of car sharing? I'm not sure about research. The only thing I've shown in my presentation is that car sharing people are cycling more and are walking more, and that's good for health. So, and of course there are other issues. There are less pollution. Shared cars are normally more environmental friendly than owned cars. So that's another good, that's also good for health, less pollution in the neighborhood. So I don't know if you know about research, Jeffrey. It's quite obvious.
Can I just add something to the first question? In Belgium, with the cozy car system, we have a special insurance, and we pay a certain price per year to have this insurance. And last year, the price was settled down because of there were actually no accidents with car sharing people. And our theory is that people who are using a car from a neighbor are more attentive because they have to return the car to their neighbor, their friend, they know them. So the social control is very, very important. So maybe not the age, but the fact that you use a car from someone you know is actually very interesting for insurances.
Actually, that was an answer that we actually expected to hear. Mr. Yoshizawa, perhaps you can also comment on this. Because your drivers in your community car sharing, as we heard yesterday as well, you cannot really judge drivers only by their age. Maybe you can talk about that by sharing some anecdotes, because we heard some stories yesterday. Was I saying something? Mr. Kimura, about Mr. Kimura, that there was no accident with Mr. Kimura. Yes, I was talking about that yesterday. Well, maybe I should talk instead of you. So when you are feeling sick, Mr. Kimura was saying that I'm sorry, I cannot drive. So he's very careful. There are 7 areas that we cover with this service, but fortunately, we have never seen any major accident. I think that is, like we heard, everyone is very careful when they drive. So accident rate is very low, I think. Having said that, it doesn't mean that this service is risk-free. So we have to be mindful of that and then try to minimize the possibility of accident risk. So members of the service are aware that drivers are not professional drivers. They are aware that drivers are volunteer drivers from the same community. Therefore, their family members signed a consent that the drivers will not be professional drivers. And after we receive the proper consent from the members, the drivers can transport those people. Initially, people are concerned about the quality of the drivers and the service, of course, but within the community, we will pay utmost attention to the safety. So the series of answers we received, let me summarize them. So Jeffrey mentioned about the insurance scheme. So insurance scheme is one way of supporting this service, and at the same time, people have this understanding that you are driving someone else's car. And also, if you listen to actual driver's voice, when you are driving alone, you may be less attentive, but if you are carrying someone with you, you feel you are responsible for the safety of your passengers, so you will tell everyone to buckle up. And so I think the awareness of the safety is very high when you participate in this kind of service. And all the members, by enrolling this service, probably have positive impact, and probably positive impact on the health as well. And I think one way of proving that is to conduct a survey and actually show it in a visible manner.
So now there's a mention of health, and it's not directly related to car sharing, but in a Tamaki town of Mie Prefecture, and they have long been engaged in on-demand sharing and of cars. And so there's the bus service called Genki Bus that is a very popular on-demand bus service, and there are the senior citizens who use them and senior citizens who don't. And they made a comparison of the medical cost, medical expenditure of these two types of senior citizens. And so the cost for supporting the community bus or the on-demand community bus was equal to the medical expense that was reduced by the fact these senior citizens have become more active and they are they are healthier than those who are not using the services. So there is that statistics. And I believe this was from Holland. So there's a study on the commutation, and so those who walk or to cycle to work, you spend much less money on the medication. So they're given 1 extra day for the paid holidays. That's the case of Holland. So let me give you some additional information as well, if I may. So Dr. Shibano and Dr. Hatoyama's questions, this may be a little bit away from the car sharing, but I would like to ask a little bit about the autonomous drive. And so the question to Dr. Shibayama is whether the autonomous drive will encourage the community car sharing. So I think we can spend a whole hour talking about the autonomous drive. But so could you elaborate a little bit on the relation between the car sharing and also the aging drivers from your point of view? So let's start from Dr. Shibayama. So it's about, if I am to respond directly to the micro transport, micro community transport system, I think it'll be beneficial. So autonomous drive will be beneficial in terms of spreading the car sharing, because autonomous drive will, when it's successful, it's going to compress the cost, so it'll be easier. But so autonomous drive makes it easier for people to get in the car, so that may mean that there may be more demand for cars on roads. And so the sharing should be encouraged so that the public transport will be will not simply mean that there are more cars and more transport network because of the autonomous drive.
And sometimes to understand what might happen in the future, we can look to the United States. There are some markets are evolved much more than European or Asian markets. There you see the free-floating systems, the ride-sourcing systems. Today, there's more car usage because of that kind of shared mobility. And there's a big chance that we will have that with that the impact will be much higher with autonomous cars. So in Europe, they predict that we have in 2030 200 million cars instead of 280 million today. So we will have fewer cars, but they will be used much more. And that's why we as Taxistop and Autodeal.net always say, don't focus on one mode, focus on connectivity between public transport and shared modes, and that will make a positive impact with or without autonomous cars.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's good to agree. But also, I think there was a discussion about taxi and public transport and so on and so on. I think in the future, when we talk about autonomous transport, those things will be vaguer. Public transport will change, smaller buses, smaller autonomous buses. The difference between taxi and driving will change. The difference between sharing and public transport will change. So I think we have to prepare ourselves to the future, and we have to start people to learn sharing. And if we do that, then we will go for the heaven scenario, and people will use less cars and go more by bike and feet.
まああまり
Well, I don't want to destroy the dreams, but if I may say this, even without, so autonomous drive will take time before it is going to be completely unmanned, and it is said it's going to take until 2030, and even then I wonder if it's going to be fully autonomous or fully unmanned. And but once it is materialized, the connection or connectivity with other modes of transport will come under scrutiny. Of course, other modes of transport may be automatized as well, but connection will be so much easier than it is now. And overall, the cities and also the community mobility will be enhanced overall. So from my perspective, it doesn't have to be a full automation or autonomous system. So less accident risks will bring about the more opportunities for the communities to help each other, and there will be more citizens. In fact, there are a fair number of citizens who would like to contribute to the communities. But then there are a lot of cases that these volunteer candidates will give up for the fear of the safety or accidents per se. And if the autonomous drive can guarantee better safety, it's going to be better for the shared transport. And also these different people have different roles to play in the community. So if old men can feel needed by the community, this will give them more willingness and the motivation to make contribution to the society. But the autonomous drive will deprive these men or the people who want to make a personal contribution to the community of the opportunities to do so. And so as Dr. Hatoyama said, his comment may be breaking the wishes or dreams. We don't have to go so far, but when we talk about the senior drivers, so once the autonomous drive, we don't have to worry about the safety in relation to the senior driver. But that's not the right direction of the argument. So when such technology becomes available, I think the platform will be in sharing, focusing on the utilization or the usage of the mobility, rather than reduction of accidents. And I think that viewpoint will become increasingly important. And so, as Mr. Yoshida said, for the drivers, the very fact that he or she will be controlling the driving wheel gives them a sense of motivation, and yet it is always associated with the fear of accident or the risks of accident. So in order to address the fear, the autonomous drive can be introduced where it is appropriate. And so I think autonomous drive is a buzzword, but I think we can add to it a few different perspectives. That way, it's going to become more of a future day-to-day modes of transport. Thank you. Now, we need to begin to wrap up.
So we have this question. Is it car sharing community or is it community car sharing? The question actually pertains to the title of the symposium. Is it because you have a community that car sharing is viable, or is it because you're car sharing that a community is being built? So why don't we go to this very fundamental question and think through about what we mean by community sharing or community car sharing. We would like to ask the panelists to make a comment. To Mr. Yoshizawa, what do you think actually strengthened the binds of the community through community car sharing? What kind of background was this to this community building? So I would like to ask each of the panelists to give their view. Is it car sharing community or community car sharing? It really depends on what your perspective is and where the emphasis is. The interesting question is it because you have a community that you can do car sharing, or does car sharing actually build the community? I think the starting point is the answer to the question. Of course, if you already have a community, you can establish car sharing, or the reverse. So, for example, in the case of Belgium, or in the case of Austria, which we couldn't present today, if you look at those experiences, car sharing actually was established in an established community. But what's really interesting is through car sharing, a community is actually built. So in Austria, when you have a condominium, sometimes you have these condominiums that are sold that come with car sharing services. Because when you move into a condominium, you tend to not relate to your neighbors. But through this car sharing scheme, community is built in a particular condominium. So this is what's so interesting and what it differs car sharing services from other public transport modes.
Again, it's a quite complicated question. What does the community need? I think community needs people like the people from Japan Car Sharing Association. Really with belief, with the heart on the right place, with passion. That makes a big difference, so I want to reward this. And what else does a community need? I think you shouldn't ask us, you should ask the community. That's how we sometimes go to smaller municipalities or special neighborhoods. We don't have the answer, we only have questions, and we create some living lab, co-creative process, and we don't know the answer before.
Well, I think if we talk about car sharing, this is not the complete question. Community car sharing is only just one part of car sharing. And in the end, we as Autodealing.net, and I think a lot of people here in this room, want to create livable cities, livable neighborhoods, and car sharing is just one mean to go to that goal. And we have to respect everybody, and some people want to do it in a community, other people like to be anonymous and want to share a car from a car sharing provider with an own fleet. So I think we have to promote every form of car sharing, and community car sharing has certainly a very good place in the whole car sharing ecosystem.
According to my understanding, you can have both aspects. The former one is the European pattern, and the main mission is efficiency. So you don't want to have a wasteful usage of private cars, or you want to save money. So the promotion of efficiency, the smart use of public transport is the goal of car sharing in Europe. I don't know if in the presentation this was directly mentioned, but those who use car sharing services there are many different age groups, from the young people to the elderly citizens. So that's the backdrop of the European thinking. But in the case of Japan, the young people do not access car sharing services. I think that there is a great potential to expand car sharing among the young people, but we don't see that today. And then when a disaster occurs, when the community has been devastated by a disaster, car sharing services were actually established in order to support the evacuees. So because it was very difficult to create a community in an evacuation shelter, by using car sharing services, we were able to promote community building. So the latter definition better applies to the Japanese case. In my case, basically, I believe that rather than community, what can be created from a car? That's the major challenge from my perspective. So we receive cars through a donation basis. So we donated these cars. So we need to use the car in a manner that will benefit the society. That is the principle behind our thinking. This might sound a little bit strange, but if you ask me about my fundamental thinking, I would say this. At the molecular level, and you have oxygen and hydrogen, and they combine to make water. They're vibrating again, there is a chemical change between oxygen and hydrogen to make water. So in the same token, if you can collaborate between different public transport modes, then a totally different value can be created. So how much value can you use or can you create through car sharing? And we're trying to see what kind of value we can create. And that if we take the right strategy, it will expand. So from the car, a community was created. So then what value can we create next? That is a trajectory that I would like to pursue in our initiative. As for connectivity, elderly lady became sick. She wants to call an ambulance, but she can't call an ambulance because she defers to her neighbor. So she called a driver, and the driver said, well, let us tell the ambulance to not turn on the siren when it comes to your house. So they called the ambulance, but asked them to lower the tone of the siren. So this elderly lady knew the driver very well, and so she had actually talked to the driver about her problem. And as a result, they had asked this ambulance to lower the sound of the siren. So because of the daily communication that was established between the driver and the elderly lady, she was able to trust him to give her good advice. So that was a wonderful answer to a very complicated question. So we only have 5 more minutes. No, 2 more minutes. And therefore, I think that we would like to go to the very last series of questions. In Ishii, are there any signs that the young people are becoming involved in Ishinomaki? And this is a question to Professor Yoshizawa and to Professor Shibayama. Are there any hints to encourage the participation of young people? To Jeffrey, what is the reason why young people are participating in car sharing schemes? What is their motivation? Could you give us some good advice so that we can involve the younger generation? And another question to Mr. Yoshizawa, and I think this is such an important question. Do the members of the community really accept your presence in their community? Mr. Yoshizawa. I think this has been a very courageous question, and I think everybody is curious about how you're able to earn the trust of the community. For Jeffrey, first I'd like to ask Jeffrey, what is the reason why in Belgium there are so many young people involved in car sharing services? Are there any advice that you could give us about how we can involve the younger generation?
It's a world phenomenon that younger people don't necessarily want to own things. For them, ownership of a car is not anymore a status symbol like it used to be with our generation and the elderly generation. Their status symbol is more like social media, Instagram, Snapchat, things like that. I'm old, so I don't know everything, but so that's one thing. There are several studies who are proving that. So I think that's the reason why car sharing is becoming more popular with younger people. And if you want to involve them, then you have to follow their needs and follow their lifestyle. And I think you need to make it very easy, very connected. I think you have to use smartphones to open cars and so on to get to younger people. So that's, for me, the main point, and that's the reason why in Belgium, and I think in other countries too, younger people are starting to share. I think it's possible in Japan too, and I think the Car Sharing Association of Japan could address to younger people with their nice cars, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to involve those young people in this car sharing scheme.
Now, it's either Mr. Shibayama or Mr. Yoshizawa. Who goes first? I think Jeffrey has covered everything I wanted to say. But if I may add just one thing, we really need to understand the lifestyle and the needs of the young people. That is, of course, very necessary. But young people are also diverse as well. So I think we need to adopt a wider perspective. For example, in Ishinomaki, there is a university, but they have their school bus to transport their students from different parts of the region. So there are young people in Ishinomaki, however, they are not really socializing with the local community. They would come to the school in Ishinomaki, but the bus will take them straight to their home. So they do come to the Ishinomaki, but they don't really have opportunities or mechanism to really go out in the town and enjoy the town. They would just stay within the campus of the university, or they just go straight home. So there are young stars who believe we believe there's a potential for using the car services, sharing services. So I think it is necessary for us to investigate their needs. And perhaps it's a good idea to involve the university itself to do a research so as to identify their needs. The young people's I think their presence is not very noticeable, but I do stress the fact that there are young students in Ishinomaki. But there is also the fact that they are not coming out from the university socializing with the local community. Mr. Ishizawa? I think this is the area that we are yet to address. In reality, in Ishinomaki, I think there are people who are taking initiative in implementing a shared house. And we are talking about the collaboration with such shared house services. And also maybe we talk about introducing the services to student accommodation. So there must be some needs. And as Jeffrey has said, we need to understand the ways of thinking of the young people maybe we can ask for the donation of the cars that suits the needs of the young people, and maybe we can approach them in slightly different manner. However, we have been targeting different groups of people, and the way we communicate with young people is different because young people utilize social SNS or line service, or I think Jeffrey's services, they can sort of address the needs of the young people. So I think encounter with services available in Belgium, meeting with Jeffrey and is learning about the cases of the Belgium is very useful. So we would like to learn from their examples and then localize them to cater for the needs of our region, so that more young people will participate in the service. What came to my mind is that in Jeffrey's presentation, I think there was one of the hints was that don't focus on the first car. So we shouldn't focus on the first car of the young people. Maybe people in their 30s and 40s, they may have 2 cars, and then they struggle to maintain 2 cars. So maybe we can think about those people, and maybe they have a good reason to participate in this car sharing services in Shinomaki. I shouldn't say too much as a moderator, and I think from this point onwards, I think everyone who is presented in the room can give more thoughts. And because timekeeper has been telling me that I need to stop, therefore I need to comply. I need to follow the instruction. Today we have received various questions. Let me try to summarize. As for the car sharing as a whole, one of the challenges faced is the sort of legal areas and also the conflicts with other mode of transportation. And the effect also the micro transportation means is one of the benefits of the car sharing service, and it could complement the public transportation services. And the community car sharing, in order for it to be sustainable, we need to think about whether it's a car sharing community or community car sharing. And also we need to think about the involvement of the young people. And Mr. Ishida didn't really say clearly, but who is going to replace Mr. Yoshizawa? Maybe Jeffrey and Angelo. Their services being succeeded by the different people. That's why it's continuing. So maybe we need IT tools to maintain the service so that the service can go on without relying too much on Mr. Yoshizawa. And also, we didn't really touch on this, but becoming financially independent is quite important. Rather than going straight to achieve this target, currently we are seeing some positive impacts of this type of services. So by focusing on positive impact, I believe gradually we can approach to our goal of being financially independent. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for submitting various questions, and I apologize that we were not able to cover all the questions, but thanks to you we were able to have a good and fruitful discussions. With that, I would like to conclude the panel discussion.